Glen Hartwig, welcome to Over the Bonnet.
Thank you.
You've not long been elected Mayor of Gympie.
Yep.
What are you hoping? A complete change for the whole area?
We're here to represent the entire region, not just Gympie. So I think for us in this next term, it's about back to basics and about getting the core responsibilities of council, doing them and doing them well. We're obviously in a financial predicament that I think, most of us didn't realise it'd be as bad as what it is. We all thought that there was some serious financial issues to deal with. But as we dig into the data and find out where the organisation is actually at, it's a little bit more serious than what we anticipate. So it's about doing the simple things, focusing on our core responsibilities and doing them well. And then once we've got that sorted, then we'll be able to step out and do some other things that benefit the community as a whole.
What do you call core responsibilities?
Simple stuff: roads, rates, and rubbish. It's not sexy,
Were you surprised by what you found when you got into office?
Look, yeah, I actually was, because I had been someone that could see that things weren't going the way they should, that we were spending more than we should. And I'd been very vocal within council about my concerns for the rate at which we were spending and the lack of financial accountability. And I honestly thought we'd start at zero. I thought there'd be no money in the bank, but we'd have something to work off. We'd have something to move forward from. Everything should have been maintained nearly at that minimum standard. And what we have found, and I had a conversation with one of our staff members who's very passionate about business improvement, and he said to me, "Glenn, I've read some of your posts about the lack of maintenance on our roads and those sorts of things." And he said, "But it's right across the organisation." He said everything that we own as an organisation, the maintenance has been neglected. He said the chair you're sitting on, the desk you're sitting at, everything. And then when you go into my office, the chair that I use is the mayoral chair, if you want to call it. There's a pad on there that's held on there by sticky tape. I mean, everything that we have has been neglected, and it's just going to take some time to start to do the basics, the things that really don't excite people. But when you're driving down a road that's falling apart,
they probably do, because as you say, someone has a pothole outside the house, they're going to want it fixed.
Yeah, and that's our job, is to do those basics and allow people to get on with their life with as little inconvenience as possible. And when you're driving over roads that are rough, it affects you financially. Your cars wear out a lot quicker. The mechanic might like it because he's replacing your shocks and all the rubbers and all that a lot quicker. But that's money that can't be spent in other businesses in the community, and puts further pressure on people when rates notices come out and they think, well, I just spent $600 fixing up a car that I have to drive on a rough road. So, it's like I said, but just before, it's not sexy stuff. We're just going to get back to basics, start some financial repair, start organisational repair, and get our culture where, Gympie Regional Council is the place to work. Not because it's an easy, hey, show up and sit in the corner and do nothing. We need our pound of flesh from staff, but the reputation that comes from our productivity and from the environment that we create makes it a sought-after place to work, because you enjoy it. Maybe not every day, but I think for me, if you put have worked it on your resume, a current employee of Gympie Regional Council, and there's a period of time there, maybe 3 to 5 years, where a prospective employer sees that and they know our reputation from our productivity and from our organisational culture and the systems and that we have in place, that they go, let's interview them. It's that line on their resume is a foot in the door. What happens after the interview or during the interview, well, that's up to the staff member, but let our organisation be a springboard for you to go on to achieve greater things.
You'd really want to be hanging on to the good staff though, wouldn't you?
Well, absolutely. But I mean, at the same time, if you start to take that mentality of we don't want to lose people, you generally then try to stifle people's growth. I think the reality is if you've got a good organisation, if it's a great place to work, good staff will stay. Some of them will leave, and we have to accept that, but they will go somewhere else that is second rate compared to where they were. And the first opportunity, they'll come back to us and they'll perform better and they'll appreciate the place that they are, that they get to work in then. So, I just want it to be the best place to work and let people decide what they want to do with their careers.
It surprises me though, with you being a member of the previous council, that you didn't know the depth of financial problems that the Kalula Council or the Gympie Regional Council was actually in.
Look, I found it really hard to get information, and I wasn't the only councillor.
And that's really bad.
Absolutely.
But you're a member of council, you couldn't get information.
Look, a fine example, it took me 18 months of consistent asking. I want a breakdown of our reserves. And people, we basically have two bank accounts. One is cash at bank, which we can use to pay our bills and pay our staff wages. And the other one is constrained funds. And that's written in legislation that there's certain money that council collects that must be put aside and spent on a particular purpose. It's constrained. So we may have at any point, $15, $20 million in the bank, but 10 of that or 15 of that could be constrained funds that we can't spend on paying our staff wages. And I wanted a breakdown, and I wanted a historical understanding of where we were and where we had come from. So give me the last 5 years of what was our total cash in terms of cash at bank and constrained funds, and give me a breakdown and a year-by-year breakdown of what were the changes in those two amounts. Did our constrained funds change? What did we spend that money on? Did our cash at bank change? What did we spend that money on? 18 months. I finally got a time with the CFO. We sat down and he pulled out an A4 and said, "There you go, Glenn, that's it." I said, "But this is just stuff from our annual report. I can see this online. How much do we have of those monies is constrained, and what's it constrained for?" And I couldn't get that information.
That seems really bizarre.
Look, it was just part of the organisation that we were in. That's just how things were done in Gympie Regional Council, and it's not appropriate. I'm not justifying it. I'm just trying to let people know that that's where we were, and the direction that we're heading is very different. And councillors, I encourage them to ask questions. I encourage them to hold staff at account, because that's our job. The role of councillors and the bureaucracy is this gentle dance of where it's staff want to do their things their way, and we have to make sure that we're actually heading in the direction that the community wants. So it's not always how do you put it? It's just that it's not the most. Sometimes there's a little bit of tension between the two groups because we each have our different perspective on where we think we should go. And so when council is too cushy with staff, you don't ask the questions you need to ask, and you don't get the information you need. And I think we're at a good point now where councillors are encouraged to ask questions. They're supported in that, and staff are realising that it's a different world that we're in now.
There were talks that there was going to be a lot of staff laid off, but that seems to have been put back. What's the story there? Council
understands that we can't afford the number of staff we have. We're at a point where we go, okay, well, let's lock in a minimum of a 10% rate increase right across the board for everyone for the next 4 years, or we make some difficult decisions that aren't enjoyable, but we set the organisation up on a trajectory where we can start to do things for the community. If we went with the 10% rate rise and we could afford then to keep everyone employed. You put them in the corner though, and because even though you can afford to pay their wages, you can't buy them a pencil to do anything. So for me that's a futile approach, and isn't in the interest of the ratepayer. We do have to reduce our number of staff, our ratios of frontline staff to office staff is out of whack when you compare with any other local government around the country, and particularly any local governments that are similar in demographic to ours. So we have to make that decision. We started that process with the former acting CEO. The instructions...
Was he pushed or did he leave of his own accord?
The CEO, the CEO resigned, and we accepted his resignation. There have been some other directors that have, one was made redundant, and there are two on leave at present. And we've appointed a new CEO that will do a whole review. And I think, putting these redundancies on hold actually goes to show how Shane Gray, the new CEO, is very steady in his approach. The instructions and the view of council is that we feel we're a little bit too heavy in the upper and middle management. So the positions that we wanted to target to put ourselves in a position where we were financially sustainable didn't relate to any frontline or operational staff. They were about upper and middle management where we feel the organisation is rather bloated. The new CEO's come in, and in 2 days we're supposed to sign off on some positions and said, no, this is my watch. I need to be comfortable that every position that we're making redundant is in the best interest of the organisation and therefore the best interest of the ratepayer, and he's put a hold on it for the time being. He's going to take some time to do a complete organisational review and understands the positions that council want to target, which is the upper and the middle management. And he'll go about that and report back to council, and we'll look, it's inevitable. It's sad because I know what it's like to lose my job. I know what it's like to be a single parent and come out of a mine and be told, thanks fellas, it's Friday afternoon, don't come Monday, we've lost the contract. I mean, it hurts. It's not enjoyable. But we're in a position where we need to fix up a sinking ship, and
wow, that's a big thing to call it.
We could drop $30 million on our road network tomorrow, and we would only get it back to minimum standard. And every bitumen road should be resealed a minimum of 15 years, depending on use, and we're at 26. So we're way behind in our bitumen road maintenance. And when you do that, you end up with a lot more potholes, you end up with a lot more clay panning. Those things need to be fixed up first before you actually go and reseal it. So it's just like a ball of string.
Does it keep you up at night?
Sometimes, yeah. Yeah, sometimes you wake up early in the morning and think, how am I going to, where can we find a rabbit to pull out of that hat, But look, we've got, the new CEO, Shane, has extensive local government experience. He was an advisor to 15 councils in the central and northern Queensland. He's seen this stuff before. He knows what we need to do. It's just a long road back. And I think for the councillors, we all had ambitions and desires on what we wanted to do. We knew we would need to do a little bit of repair. We didn't realise it'd be sort of, emergency surgery like what we're into. And that just puts on hold everything that we wanted to do for the community for another couple of years. So, but mate, at the end of the day, it is what it is. We'll just get stuck in and make sure we let people know the facts around why we're making decisions, and so they can best understand. They may not agree with what we do, but at least they'll know why we're doing it.
You have a farming background?
Yes.
What was that like growing up in that sort of idyllic situation of the farm? And there were some good times and also some real tragedy for you, I believe. Was it like growing up on the farm?
Mate, I can't think of anything better. Like, we were very sheltered. We just worked before school and after school, and Saturdays was work. But I guess we didn't know anything else, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. We rode motorbikes and drove cars before we could reach the pedals, and did all that. We had an old Daihatsu Scat, and we used to just put it in first gear, low range, and let the clutch out and idle everywhere we went because we were too short to reach the pedals. But it was good. You learn so much about yourself. You pick up so many skills that you don't realise the value until later on in life. Maintaining vehicles and all that sort of stuff. And it was, picking zucchinis, and I hated picking beans. Oh, man. Hated it with a passion. I have the utmost respect for bean pickers that can bend over for 8 hours a day. But I learnt from Mum and Dad that you have to have a good work ethic. You've got to get up and get into it. But also to take pride in what you produce. We on every box, or in the early days in the 80s, it was Hessian bags. There was BF and CA Hartwig. Proudly produced by BF and CA Hartwig, and Dad instilled in us that putting your name to something was very important, and to make sure that when you put that out the gate, it was the best quality you possibly could do, and that there was a moral obligation with farmers to produce a product that nourished the end consumer. So mate, it was great. It was wonderful, and I've still got the farm now, and it'll. If my kids want it, they can have it. If not, someone else will. But no, I guess we missed out on a lot of sport and those sort of things, which I enjoyed my sport, and because we grew up on the farm, there was a natural ability there. We were always very active, and we did miss out things there. But I mean, at the end of the day, it was great.
You talk about your dad. Tell us about him. Good farmer?
Yeah. He was, for me, he was just this rock of dependability. He was the sort of person that you knew that if you were in a storm, if you were just near Dad, everything would be okay. And, he expected us to get in and work. There was no, no free lunch. But him, particularly in the later years, Dad and I, my brother had gone away to university, and so it was him and I really, and bean prices were always dropping. When we started in the 80s, you used to grow for about 3 months and make decent money out of that, but it got worse as every year went on, and by 91, before Dad died, we were growing sort of 8 or 9 months of the year, and him and I just, we could be working on the tractor, and you didn't have to say anything. I knew what spanner he needed, and he knew what spanner I needed, and you'd just be handing stuff around, and it was, I just appreciate all the little things he taught me, particularly about horses, and how to be gentle with them, and there's, and I think he was always committed to principles before profit. It was the way he farmed. He was one of the first farms in this area in particular, but maybe even around the state, that was certified biodynamic through the Biodynamic Agriculture Association of Australia, and with Alex Podolinsky, and that's how we grew beans. And it was all about his moral obligation as a farmer to do the best he could, for the land, but also for the people that consumed. And that sort of, I suppose those principles have sort of come with me all my life, and particularly into council as well. I think he was a great dad. Wonderful.
Well, it was a tragedy the way. Can you share how you lost your dad and you were there at the time?
Yeah, I suppose. My cousin and I, we had a little veggie patch, and Dad said to us, "Look, go down and dig this area here." And we'd had a pretty tough year, 91. It wasn't that profitable, and so he ran around and trimmed up every tree, possibly big hoop pine trees and silky oak and anything he could just to sell, to sort of make a dollar. And so we went down to the veggie patch, and I just had this feeling in my gut something wasn't right. He was going off to cut down the last silky oak tree, and it just kept getting worse and worse until eventually I said to my cousin, "Look, I'm going to see Dad." And he said, "Oh, but we haven't finished here." And the deal was with my dad, if he said go and do it, you went and did it and you finished it, and then you went and saw him. You didn't come back and say, "Hey Dad, I'm half done, what do you want me to do?" So I just said to my cousin, "Look, mate, I'm going. You can stay here if you want." And we both ended up riding over to where he was on the bike, and I just, as soon as I arrived, I knew something was wrong. The tractor was still going, and you could just feel it, and so I told my cousin to go home and get Mum, and then I went down to where Dad was, and he hadn't completely passed away. He was still there, and sort of, he'd had a tree injury to his leg, and was sort of looking at me trying to tell me stuff, and I was just distraught, absolutely distraught. I just, it was the first time in my life that I realised that rock wasn't going to be there. His injury was so significant. There was nothing that would save him, but even at that point, Dad was pretty steady until you crossed the line, and even then, he was trying to reach out to me, even though he couldn't really, get words together. So it wasn't the most enjoyable experience.
Oh, must have been.
But
absolutely. You can feel it just hearing about it, but also a blessing that you were there.
Yeah, it's I suppose, I've never really thought about it that way. You don't ever get your parent, your whether it's a father or a mother that's passed away, to ever say, well, I'm proud of you anymore, or you're doing a good job, or you've got good kids or something. All that stuff.
You must be proud of you though, where you've taken over as the mayor of the city that you grew up in.
Oh, well, I hope so. I hope so. I don't do it because I would like him to be proud of me, but I hope he sees that that the principles that he sort of instilled in us as kids, that they're represented in me, and that that I'm doing what's right. I just see it as a position of responsibility, and I see that there's certain skills that I have that I've learnt over time that I think are beneficial to the council and the community right now, and it's not something I sort of aspired to do. I didn't, in 2016, I didn't sit down and go, well, I just want to do 4 years as a councillor and have a tilt at the top. It was the furthest thing from my mind. I was happy, running my business. I was happy being a councillor, and for me, it was just matters of principle. And, I hope Dad sees that, it's principles that drive me, and that he can sort of make that connection between himself and me.
What changed you though, going through that experience on the farm with your dad?
I lost a lot of weight. Holy white man. Yeah. I look back on it now, and I didn't handle it that well. Dad was so such a strong person, and was such an important part of my life. So that was December 91, and in, I think, February 92, I was at the police academy. But I lost a lot of weight, and went down to Brisbane, and I think I was just lost for a long time. I didn't really know. I was finding out who I was, because having someone around you with such a strong presence, and suddenly there was a big hole to fill, and I suppose I started to find out a bit more about myself. I certainly appreciate parents more, I think, and particularly around the world. We're generally pretty lucky in this country and in most Western countries, where the majority of parents raise their children and those sorts of things. Whereas if you look to some of the third world countries, it's quite a different cup of tea. And I think I became a little bit more empathetic, really.
Which must have helped you when you became a police officer.
Yeah, I don't know. Even that was never a career for me. It was, Dad I just wanted to be on the farm. I was happy on the farm working with Dad, and he said, you need to go and work for 5 years somewhere else, see how the other half live, and really know then whether or not this is what you want to do.
Wisdom.
It was, yeah. And I didn't have that once he was gone. Which was, that's the struggle. I think, to find someone, particularly in your late teens and coming into your mid-20s there, where you've got someone that's solid that can give you those bits of advice. And I think that was probably the thing I missed the most, that, in times of difficulty, often you've got nowhere to go. You've just got to sort of rely on yourself, and it's hard to find people that are good mentors. So that would be the biggest thing that I miss. Just that, and even when life is a struggle, you just got someone to go and rest your head on their shoulder, and they can say a comforting word of, like, you'll be right, you'll be okay, So I suppose, yeah, it did create a fair bit of self-reliance, but it's something I do miss, even now.
Did you question the fact that you did have that feeling that you needed to go and see that something was wrong?
Um, I I think the only thing that made me probably delay going earlier was the fact that, we had a work ethic that when Dad said go and do it, you went and finished it before you went and saw him. And it just, the feeling became stronger and stronger to the point where I just couldn't ignore it anymore. I knew something was wrong before I left the veggie patch.
That must have been, though, did you look back and go, wow, I had that feeling? Did you question it?
I think it raised questions about, different sides of human beings. And, I guess from a scientific perspective, how do you explain that?
Exactly.
So then you start to wonder, well, what other aspects are there to life? Is, what we're told the only way that we interact as human beings? Are there other things out there? It certainly created a lot of questions, yeah.
Did you get any answers?
Oh, yeah, when I looked around.
But, it was a pretty significant thing to happen for you to have that feeling. Did it, make you sort of ask different questions that you might not have before?
Look, we were, went to church every Sunday, so we understood that we were of the belief that we had there was more than us than just a body. And I think through that whole process and further on in life, I started to question the relevance of that, and look for answers that explained a lot of the things that I was, finding out through that event, and then through other things that occurred in the police service. So yeah, I think we are just amazing beings, and there's more to us than just 2 arms and 2 legs. And I think the challenge is whenever you start to delve into this realm, people think, well, you're out there swinging on the trees, smoking dope, and but I'm more of the middle road. I think we can't deny that there is something wonderfully magical about what we are as human beings that probably other animals, or maybe other animals, have something similar as well. I don't know, but I know what I've experienced, and I don't mind if people haven't experienced that or disagree with me.
It sounds pretty powerful, though.
Oh, mate, I don't know. It's just for me. It just is what it is, and it's what I see or what I've felt or what I've experienced, and I don't expect everyone to agree with me or feel the same way.
How did it change your relationship with your mother? You talk about your connection with your parents, the loss of your father at an early age in such a tragic way. How did it change your relationship with your mother?
It probably, I think the timing was that I was sort of getting out of the nest anyway. So, I think everything sort of went on the same there as it had before. So Mum had always been a hard worker. She worked full time at the hospital in town, and then would be back working on the farm to sort of keep the 2 pieces of string as close together as possible. And she still works now. Like I'd like her to slow down, but I don't think it's going to happen. But Mum had to endure a lot. To lose Dad, who, I don't think he was just a rock for me. I think he was a rock for all of our family. He was sort of the glue that, and even our extended family in terms of his brothers and sisters, I think they felt it as well, in that he just had this way about himself and a presence that everything would be okay. You might be going through something tough, but you'll be all right. A comforting word from him really comforted people. And Mum didn't have that anymore, and so to go from where you're married to someone and you're pushing in the same direction and to suddenly you're on your Pat Malone, it was very challenging and difficult for Mum.
You moved on to the police force. Why did you make that decision to go from the farm to the academy?
Well, it's a bit comical. Dad said, you got to go and do something else. I didn't want to go to uni. And a mate of mine applied or was going to apply and said, Glenn, you should apply too. And I went, oh, righto. So we had a sergeant of the Gympie Police Station came to a careers day at the high school, and he said, you get to, use a gun or carry a gun. I thought, well, whoop-de-doo. I mean, we had them around the farm all the time. That meant nothing to me. He said, oh, you get to drive a car around. And I thought, oh, well, I've been doing that since I couldn't reach the pedals, so that means nothing. But then he said you get 4 weeks holiday a year plus 6 weeks if you work shift work. Now, we hadn't been on 4 weeks holiday in 10 years on the farm. So I thought my ears pricked and I went, holy what, man, this is amazing. 4 weeks a year and 6 weeks if you work shift work. So I applied and went through the process. And the funny story, this is, I don't know, it could be embarrassing, but I find it funny anyway. But you have to do a 2.4 kilometre run and a few things at the academy. And I went down for that and pretty fit back in those days and did a good time. And there was another one of the guys he came up and...
I don't know, you're not looking in such bad shape these days still.
Mate, I'm lucky if I can run to the fridge. So Mark Harvey was his name. He came up to me and he started talking and said, oh, you did a good time. And I went, yeah. And I sort of looked around as if it was a big secret. I said, mate, you get 4 weeks holiday a year with this thing. And he was at uni studying to be a teacher. And he looked at me and went, yeah. And I said, mate, unbelievable, isn't it? Because I just had no concept that was what you did when you worked for someone else. So we ended up being in the same squad. Very first day, he looks at me and says, I know you. You're here for the holiday. But yeah, for me, I don't know. I think particularly at that time I was lost, and I would have done anything because I just needed to find myself and find my way in life, and sort of that's why I went there.
How did you feel the first holiday when you actually put the leave pass in?
Mate, then I found out you could actually stack them up, and if you didn't take holidays in the first year, you could roll them over and you'd end up, with 8 weeks at the end of 2 years. So I didn't take many holidays early on because I wanted 3 months was the maximum, and I wanted to have 3 months holidays stacked away. So now the first holiday I took was I went over to Western Australia to see my brother. He was over there doing a bit of mining, and that was good. 2 weeks off and tripped around and had a look at Western Australia, which is just, well, back in the mid-90s, and I'm still sure it's still the same. It's just beautiful. The coastline there is different to the eastern side here, and the people there were just so friendly and welcoming. We just rolled the swag out and sand dunes all over the place, and that's how we camped. It was blooming great.
I did the trip to WA, went up to the Kimberley's machine operating as a young fella, just as a bit of a break from the media. So I do understand living in the back of the van at Scarborough Beach, and it was a great spot to get away from, and it was like there was very much over here and over there.
Yeah.
But when you got into the police force, what stuck out for you?
I think the paperwork. I had no concept of paperwork and all that sort of stuff, and we were post Fitzgerald, and they still hadn't worked out the training course and all that sort of stuff. Everything was sort of on the run, so there were a lot of things that we had to sort of wade through once we were out on the job. I had to learn very quickly about other human beings. I didn't realise that if they were doing their nut, even if I just showed up and they were having a go at me, that it wasn't actually me. It was the position that I represented. And that if anyone else was in that uniform and in that position, standing there like I was, that they would be the target of the abuse as well. So that was, I was 18 or 19 or something, and you didn't get that in the bean patch. So, there was some steep learning curves about understanding human beings and how they, or a certain demographic of human beings interacted with other human beings. And it was something completely foreign to me.
How did that affect you, though, when you were dealing with it on a day-to-day basis? Because there is that animosity, obviously, towards police on some levels. How did you deal with that, as you say, going from the bean patch, which sounds quite idyllic, except that you were bending over for 8 hours? How did you cope with that sort of animosity that you're experiencing?
Just had good, mentors around me that would say, "Hey, it's not you. It's And I think you just in that environment you realise that these people are frustrated either with their lives or with society or with something, and you're the area that they're going to vent it into. Look, it for me, it did take a little while to understand and get a grasp of, but you just sort of you learn these things as you go, and eventually you just realise, well, I'm just here to do a job. There's a process that we have to go through, or there's something we've got to do, and that's all there is. And don't take it personally. It's a bit like the mayors and councillors get criticised all the time.
I was going to say, as a politician, must be a great breeding ground to find out that you're not going to please all of the people all of the time.
Yeah, and there were some occasions in the police service where you'd have people. I remember one young girl that was quite rude and as she was coming out of a nightclub and abusive, and 2 days later I had to go to her house because she had it broken into, and it was she recognised me and I recognised her, and it was one of those moments where I think she learnt just as much as that from I did, in that if we treat everyone with the respect that we would want to be treated if we were in their position, then the world's a much better place.
What about what's going on with the police service over in the US at the moment? Are you following that?
Look, actually, no, I don't have a lot of time to follow the TV or social media. I think...
Okay, the George Floyd incident, which has triggered the Black Lives Matter, and they basically put a knee to his neck, and 9 minutes, 46 seconds. Until he passed away.
I don't understand why anyone would feel a need to do that, because there is processes in place. You are trained, well, in Queensland anyway, we were trained to a level where we understood that the minute you had someone arrested, say you'd put them in handcuffs, the first thing you did was roll them over into the recovery position, as in first aid, because you didn't want to inhibit or restrict their airways in any way. So I don't follow a lot of the American stuff because I don't relate to everything or the way they think in a lot of circumstances. Putting your knee on the back of someone's neck for 9 minutes, was it 42 seconds?
46.
46. Yeah. I can't join those dots. It doesn't make any sense to me why you would do that, and
well, what
that sort
you're
of thing's
saying is
inappropriate.
Completely at odds with what you say, the training that you've received.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. We would have never... the minute you had someone handcuffed behind their back, instantly the recovery position, you rolled them into the recovery position.
Because he was sort of sitting there saying that he couldn't breathe. And the other officers that were there stood around. And from what you're saying, that wouldn't happen in Queensland anyway.
I didn't see any of that in my time in Queensland. I worked in the Valley, which was the Fortitude Valley was very different in the early 90s to what it is now. That was another learning curve, let me tell you. I didn't realise that most of the sex industry workers were actually men. So they used to still walk the streets, and look, I don't know. I think in America it is a different world to us. I know when I was at Red Hill, we had some guys from America come out and ride with us for a little while, and we would pull a car over and do an RBT, and it was just one of the things we did. We got back in the car and they just couldn't believe that we didn't pull our guns out, and and that's their standard procedure there.
Yeah, but everyone else is carrying over there as well.
I know, so it just seems to be, and it might just be my perception, a trigger-happy environment where everyone's willing to shoot first and ask questions later, and that's not us over here. So I don't relate at all to the way they do things. I think they definitely need to, as police, need to act with a lot more care in their environment. But if you've got someone in handcuffs or restrained, it's they're no longer a threat.
People are leaving the service over there in droves. And they're talking about underfunding police services over there. Is it a career that you would recommend to someone here in Queensland because of what you know, because of what you've experienced?
Look, I think it's not something I would go back to. I saw enough, and hopefully I learned enough from my time there. Look, if people are inclined to do, there are a lot of occupations that I wouldn't do, but that doesn't mean we don't need them. I mean, the chaos that we would have and the anarchy if we didn't have police there to protect our democratic ways would be far worse. So if people want to head down that path, I wish them all the best. Go in with your eyes open. It's not like CSI or something like that where you solve a crime in half an hour or an hour time slot. And there is a lot of paperwork, a lot of boredom, and a lot of repetitious work. And I think that particularly in Australia, I think if we can appreciate what the police do, and even the fire services and for ambulance guys. I mean, it's a really tough job, and often we don't apply the standards of humanity that we apply to ourselves to them. We don't understand what their day involves, and I don't think we give them the same understanding that we would want if we were doing that job, because often police can go, from a fatal traffic accident to a violent domestic violence situation. And then there is another situation where someone is, trying to start a fight or spitting at them. And our expectation is that they should respond to that event like nothing else happened in the day. And I understand it's a really contentious topic when you start heading down this path. But when we look at the struggles that police face, I think we need to take in the context of the entire day, what they've been through and how that may have affected them before we throw them under the bus. I think most people, when they go and see just how difficult that job is, and if they got to ride along, they would have a higher respect for the work that the police do, because it's a tough gig. And I'm not saying that they get it right all the time. I'm not saying that they behave the right way all the time. But I think we should act out of compassion first before we throw people under the bus in this country.
It's interesting, though. I know as a crime cameraman, someone had to be basically dead or dying before I'd turn up, and there's always a hostile situation, and you are the person that they will direct their frustrations or whatever. As you say, you copped it as a police officer. And what's the worst thing that you had to endure as far as what you saw, what you experienced when you're in the police service?
I spent some time at the watch house at Herschel Street, the old watch house. There was a ground floor, and the upper floor was a staging unit before prisoners or people on remand would go to Wacol R&R. R&R was full, and the result was that the bodies backed up into that facility. I think it was designed to handle about 29, and at the height there we had 70. So if it was a single bed cell, there was another mattress on the floor. If it was a 2-bed cell, there was a mattress on the floor and 3 people in it. The exercise yards were just a sea of mattresses, and the prisoners in there would rotate 1 bed every day because someone had to sleep in front of the toilet. Like, it was a horrible environment for anyone. And 2 police, 70 prisoners, 1 universal key that opened every door.
Did it ever get lost?
No. and the prisoners used to call it the key to freedom, because it would open every door on that level, every door downstairs, and the door that would let them into the court system and their freedom. So it was how the politicians knew about it. And I remember one day we had the Premier of the time. We had to empty that facility out, all the property, all the paperwork associated with it. All the prisoners got trucked out to R&R. Premier at the time comes and has a look through and looks at, empty cells and whatnot, and then gets as he was heading out through the courts, we had the prisoners coming back up in the internal stairs. And that was when I realised that well, I formed the view that some politicians weren't there to actually do what was in the best interest of the people. And it wasn't a healthy environment for police. It wasn't a healthy environment for prisoners. I mean, down one side was, your pedophiles and protective prisoners who, as a young person at 20, I shouldn't have had to see what they were doing to one another. It was horrendous in the sense of the acts that they would perform on one another for pleasure. No one should have to be put through that. And, it was the environment we were in, and the politicians and the, the management of the time weren't interested in alleviating the problem,
The PTSD that, people like yourself must experience is quite real.
Oh, I think too, particularly back then, it was, anyone with a mental injury was considered soft, or a sook, or rorting the system. And in the event that,
Were there many?
Were there many that were suffering?
Well, that would come out and say things.
Oh, look, it was just the general, it was a general statement that was made by particular individuals that were probably louder than most. I think the reality was those individuals were probably suffering most. And it was, it was the same for me in that when you suffer an injury like that and you can't see a scar, or you don't have stitches, or your arm's not in a sling, but something's not right, it's really hard to fathom, and denial's a good place to go. And for those, I think some of the officers that were probably the most vocal about it were probably the ones that were suffering most and just trying to deal with it themselves and justify that they were okay,
How did it affect you?
Well, the event in question, and it may have been, it may have been the straw that broke the camel's back. We had a man sitting in a brick home, sitting on a toilet. He had his de facto on his lap. He had a paring knife in one hand that he would stab her chest with, and a knife that he had at her throat that he would cut away at. So when she grabbed the knife on the throat, he'd stab her in the chest, and vice versa. Throughout that event, and I used to we recorded it. One of the other officers recorded it, Dan McNamara, who's now at Pomona. And, I had never experienced someone that genuinely wanted to die, because he genuinely wanted to die, and this was not his first attempt at suicide. But he would beg, and he would beg with a passion and an energy that you just knew every cell in his body wanted to die. And then he had his partner on his lap who was begging with us to kill him with every cell. And the screams, the screams from her when she was being stabbed or cut were, Hollywood's got no idea. It was just a rawness that I'd never experienced before, and I couldn't comprehend. We managed to get her out, which was great. And in the process of putting handcuffs on him, at some point, an officer's gun has been dislodged from the holster, or maybe he was standing there and it dropped or something. I don't know, but I sort of put my head, because when you try to arrest people and put the cuffs behind their back, they'll bring their hands up here, and they'll lock them, and you've sort of got to pull them out. And I got right down close to him on the floor and started to pull an arm out so we could handcuff him. And at that point, when my head was pretty close to his, the gun went off. And you're sort of in a bit of a daze for a while, thinking, did something hit the floor? You can't understand how that happened, because my weapon's in my holster, Macca's is in his holster, and you don't, it doesn't make a lot of sense. And then when I could see the smoke and the blood and everything, I realised what had gone on. And we were very grateful to the family. The way that the investigation team from, I think it might have been the CJC, treated us was disgraceful. I was threatened to be charged with murder or manslaughter.
You're kidding.
And as were all of the police. And I said to the dudes, mate, we did everything we could. It was, but that was, their
Is that a result of post Fitzgerald?
Oh, I think it was. It was just part of the pendulum swinging too far one way and there not being a lot of balance. And the inspector at the CIB at the time took over the investigation and, he interviewed us and we, I think I got back to the Nambour police station at about 4 or 5 in the morning. I'd started at 2 that afternoon and our debrief was my wife at the time, Heather, just bought some sausages and some bacon and eggs into the station. We had a barbecue and a couple of beers and I went home and had a sleep. That was, next shift I rocked into work and they said, "Are you okay?" And I went, "Oh yeah, I'm fine." And that was what we did.
Were you?
Look, if I thought I was, I didn't know I wasn't. I think I didn't realise that and I don't know whether it was, you plummet off a cliff and hit the bottom or you sort of start a spiral down, but there was, I knew something wasn't right. Nambour was the police station that did most of the autopsies and a police officer had to be present. And that was me. I was one of the most junior staff there and that was my role. And I actually didn't mind it. It was quite interesting to see someone's life displayed in their organs.
It's an interesting way of putting it.
Yeah, well, you could see city people versus country people, smokers versus non-smokers, and had they consumed a lot of alcohol, and that would show up in their organs. So
of course.
I found that that part of it interesting. But I went in and the guy was Tony and who was the assistant there, and I sort of walked in and I just said, "Tony, I got to go. I can't do this. I'm going to throw up. I need to get out of here." And he said, "Oh, well, you got to sign the statement." I said, "Mate, you can write whatever you want. I don't care. You're either going to clean up that mess or you're going to clean up the mess that I create as well." And I went back to the station. I said to the boss, I said, "Mate, I can't do that anymore. Something's not, I just want to throw up when I'm in there." And what Tony was doing at the time was actually cutting through bone, and they have a little reciprocator saw, similar to when they cut off a cast off an arm, and it creates some heat, and the heat sort of burns the bone a little bit, and it's a very similar smell to gun smoke, burnt flesh, and fresh blood, and that's what I'd experienced in that incident. So going into a butcher for a number of years was something I didn't do. I just if they were cutting up through bones on a bandsaw, there's a certain amount of heat and an odour that's generated, and that would just
You wouldn't know unless you'd experienced what you'd experienced.
Yeah, I guess so, yeah.
I've been into a butcher hundreds of times and never had a bad experience, so you just don't realise. So obviously it has affected you.
Yeah, it did, and I didn't know. Once again, I didn't know why, but I think that for me, the real crux came when Heather and I were coming back from the Sunshine Coast, and we were heading over the overpass at North Arm there, where the highway goes over the rail line, and I looked at her and said, if you dropped dead right now, if you died right now, I would know exactly what to do. I know what form needs to be filled out, I know who I need to call, I know everything that we need to do in terms of procedure, but I just wouldn't feel anything. And for me, that was one of those awakening moments where I had to accept that I wasn't quite right. There was a part of me that had disconnected from emotions and feelings, and that there was something, awry. And that was probably the most profound event in terms of the effect it had on my life.
What was the best thing that happened to you while you're in the service?
Oh, I think just some of the people that you meet. I've still, there's a core group of us that we went through the academy together. We've all, not all of us are still in the police service, and you can catch up with them, and you may not have spoken to each other for 12 months, 2 years, but it's like you had a barbecue yesterday. It's, and some of the colleagues that you worked with, I still catch up with, and you talk dribble, relive old stories. But I think that's the that's the blessing that comes out of a job like that.
On the road though, is there something that stands out that that really in a good way affected you while you're out in the execution of your duties?
I think just teaching you about other human beings and about regulations and I think there's so many experiences that make up who you are and teach you about things in life. It's hard to put my finger on one. I just think it is, for the right people, it's a really good environment to learn.
We are a pretty lucky area. We've got some pretty special people in this area. We have a thing called the SCIC,
Yep.
Which I believe you're now getting involved with. Speaking with Marlene Owen, and I believe that you've lost your wife to cancer quite a few years ago. You're talking about being a single parent. How did that draw on you being the single parent for so many years?
Look, it was interesting. It was not what I wished for my kids in any way. I had, in my head, my life would be married Heather. We'd be old, sitting in a rocking chair on a porch, drinking a cup of tea, watching the sunset. I just hadn't, it wasn't the direction that I thought our life would go, and I certainly didn't want it for Josh and Maddie in any way. I often look back on that time and not being a mother, but over the last sort of 16 years being forced to try to look at things from a different perspective or a more feminine perspective. I often feel that for her, I was in the middle of trying to sort myself out. I may have been medically retired, but I still, that once the service just punted you. Once I was out the gate, there was nothing. There was no help. There was no assistance. There was nothing. They just wrote you off and said on your bike. And I was still trying to sort myself out and deal with all that sort of stuff and rebuild me. And then these, then she ended up with breast cancer. And I think at the time it was probably a little bit overwhelming for me, and I didn't want to acknowledge that, the inevitable may occur. And I look back now and I wish I'd had a lot more conversations with her about what she wanted for her children. But at that time I just wasn't emotionally strong enough to sit down and discuss those things with her, because I couldn't see how I could do the job. I didn't think I had it in me to do anything without her. She was such a wonderful woman. And I often, think, she's proceeding towards, the end of her life. And I often wonder about what she would have thought leaving me behind to look after her kids, knowing I was struggling to look after myself. And
how did you cope?
I don't know. I mean, I think in those circumstances, you've got to pull your pants up and get on with it. And at the same time, that was part of. I learned a lot from a horse, and we've all heard of equine therapy, and I've still got the horse Bessie, and she will pass away on the farm because she was such a wonderful teacher of me. Anyone who's dealt with horses knows that they sense a lot of things. And she was, Dad, when he planted on the contour with a single row planter, and we had a number of draft horses when we were kids, and that's all I knew. Still had the planter, so if I'm going to grow small crops, that's what I'll do. And so I got her, and there's a Monty Roberts. People have probably heard about the Monty Roberts method of join up with horses and that, and I did that, and we formed a connection. And I'd find that if she we were going along and she'd jump across a row, if I got frustrated or my that sort of emotion rose, she immediately her head would go up in the air and she'd look around, and then we'd be all over the place like a snake. I had to learn to calm myself down, and I had to learn to control my emotion and not let those things bother me. And I'd go and whilst I remained calm and didn't let and kept my emotions in check, everything was fine. And that taught me a lot, and just the relationship you develop with an animal like that over time, particularly when you're hurt and you're broken, and so that was in the the late 90s, and equine therapy is a and animal therapy in generally is considered something that a lot of practitioners use now. So I was sort of on the way out, I suppose, or on the mend maybe. But I just had to, the kids were important. It wasn't about me, it was about them. And
So they helped you cope.
maybe, I think, yeah, they gave me a reason to. Like, they gave me a purpose. The best advice I had from a friend was, you need to go on a bit of a holiday. And I ended up buying a caravan, and we went off all the way down to Victoria and sort of spent about 8 or 10 weeks on the road. And what the profound lesson I learned from that was at week 3, you can spend a lot of time with your kids, but put yourself in a caravan and on the road with no one else, and we were just at national parks and that sort of stuff. I got to a point where I had to either decide I was going to get on with the kids and do all that sort of stuff in a confined space, or I'd turn around and go home. And I couldn't bear to go back and say to this bloke, look, I couldn't handle it. I couldn't handle the long holiday. I came home. So I kept driving, and it was really the foundation of, me getting to know them and for who they were. And we had a great time, and we often reminisce about we'd love to go and do it again.
And they got to know you?
I think so, yeah. It was a lot of fun, and I just read a lot. And they played a lot, and we did a whole lot of stupid stuff. But I think it was just us getting some sort of foundation and some sort of connection together. Because even Heather had chemo and then radiation, and things are quite hectic, and you're sort of disjointed. And I'd been working a lot before that, so I probably hadn't spent as much time with them, even though we were on a farm, as I sort of needed to. So that was good. But then I don't know how I honestly don't. People talk about a process of grieving and all that sort of stuff, and I sometimes think you just sort of do what you have to do. If you're willing to learn and you want to get better, or you want to understand things, the answers will come at the right time. And I was, and I do believe I think reading's an important thing. You should always have a book that you've got your head in at some point, during the day, and that's just what I did. And over time, I seemed to get better and get stronger.
Because of that experience, as I was saying, with the SCIC, that's quite important to support cancer patients here in the Kallula area. Must be pretty important to you then to support it and give it your help and assistance.
Absolutely. We utilise similar services down in Brisbane, and we'd just gone through deregulation, didn't have a cracker, had nothing in terms of financial help, and we were reliant on the generosity of other organisations and other community members to sort of to house us, for 6 weeks in Brisbane while Heather had radiation. And so look, it's something that is close to my heart, because I know what it's like to be in those circumstances, and that's the wonderful thing about our region. You've got another organisation, Little Haven. When I was 29 or going on to 30, I didn't understand palliative care. I had no concept of it, and
they're pretty special people,
mate. I mean, they the job that they do. A lot of people describe them as angels, and I just think that's a bit unfair. It's not enough of an apt description, because they came into my life and I had no idea what I had to do, and I didn't want to go down that path. I didn't want Heather to pass away, and they just bought everything that I needed. They were just so wonderful. And it wasn't just them, little things like the Alma Street Kindy. After Heather passed away, that's where the kids were going, and I couldn't work out why I wasn't getting a bill, And the parents had put the hat together and covered our fees. I mean, where else do you want to live? Like really, where else do you want to live when you've got people in the community that put their money where their heart and their mouth is and chip in for someone that they don't even know? And I mean, that's why I think, what makes the world a great place, it's not all the bells and whistles, it's not all those things, it's the human beings that are in your community. And in this region, there are none better, in my opinion.
I agree with you. I've travelled most areas of Australia, and one thing that I compared the first 2 or 3 chemotherapy balls run by SCIC, and I was supposed to be paid for the first one that I turned up, and I saw how much work everyone was doing, and it was like, nah, it's okay. Thanks, but like, it was the least I could do.
Yeah.
But I've found the people in this area the most giving, and you hear a story like that, it's like, crikey.
And it's not only people, it's business owners. Like in terms of SCIC, Michelle and Chris Dodd from Adondo have gone well and truly above what most businesses would have done to support that organisation. They constantly are doing work for us out of their own pocket. They're constantly involved in any fundraising activities that we do. And, that's not saying that the other builders in town don't have their own thing, that they put their heart and soul into. That's just something that...
Oh, no, they are a big supporter.
But you go around and, we all know that, statistically, Gympie has a higher rate of volunteerism, and it sort of rolls off the tongue but doesn't really encapsulate what you get when you come here. And that's what separates us from every other town, in my opinion, in the country. When you come into Gympie or the region, if you want to be a part of the community, we will welcome you with open arms. And for every, one portion that you give, you'll get 10 in return. And it's why it's the best place to live. And I know that everyone will say, oh, the mayor's supposed to say that sort of stuff. I'm just telling you, that's what I experienced. Heather passed away a month before I was 30. And when I go to Little Haven stuff, I still don't feel I've repaid them for what they did for me, and just the love and the concern that people show in our community. At a recent chamber breakfast, we talked about Gympie's reputation as Hell Town. And for me, I don't care. If this is Hell Town, mate,
do you think it's going though?
Oh, absolutely. But if this is Hell Town, I'm in. Because it's the best place to be, because we care about one another. I think it's part of our fabric with flooding and the struggles that we face with agriculture. When the chips are down, we all get on board and we all chew on paper, because we care about one another.
And we do. Why politics? Why did you get into council in the first place?
Oh, mate, I just got frustrated. I got frustrated with, roads not being maintained, and rates were sort of going up a little bit then. And I thought to myself, well, it's either time to put up or shut up. And I thought, I'll throw my hat in the ring, and if people see value in me, then I'll do it. And if not, I'll keep doing what I was doing. And then...
Even more frustrating, though, when you got on the inside, by the sounds of it.
Yeah, it was. And local governments are really a different sort of beast. It's a combination of politics and a corporate world, but then there's a massive amounts of regulations, particularly since Ipswich, Logan and Moreton Bay and Co. And that makes it very difficult. There's... if people want to understand why local government and state and federal governments are inefficient, well, we've regulated ourselves out of efficiencies. And if you're in the corporate world and you can't compete with us, you might as well take your bat and ball and go home, because you don't have... It's like stepping into a ring with your arms and legs tied behind your back. The way I would run my business is very, very different to what we do in local government. But, I think it's... Dad always taught me to be thinking, 10, 15, 20 years down the track. And I look at Gympie and I think there's so much potential here. there's so much opportunity. We've got the bones right, but we've just failed to put money and invest time in the areas that really matter and will have an impact in perhaps 10 years' time. And I suppose that's the farmer coming out in me, having a vision for the future and seeing the town or the region as a blank canvas that we can, sort of grow and develop.
How long do you plan to be the mayor for?
Well, that's up to the people, I suppose.
Do you have a, you want to be here for the next 10, 15 years?
Oh, look, I don't think so. I think there's certain skills that I have at present that are probably suited to the environment that we're in now. And once those skills aren't suitable, then you've got to move on. And, we'll get through this term. I think this is the first step. Whether I go on, if people are happy with what I've done after this term and they put me in for another 4 years, I'd have to really have a serious look then and see whether or not I was becoming stale or whether I wasn't the right person for where the region was at then. I've got a lot of faith in my ability and to do anything. I think that comes from that farming background, and I've done a lot of different jobs, mining and stacked bricks at Gympie Boxworks when I needed to, and I believe if you've got that faith in your ability, you can turn your hand to anything, and opportunities will come up. And I don't want to be one of those politicians like so many are, that they're in for a long time and it's the people that say, hey, you're out. They forget to take note of when their time's up, when their skills are no longer needed anymore. So, and of course, everything I've got to run past Talitha. So, she came on this ride after I was elected in 2016, and has just been, when you go through life and you don't always have that person by your side, that someone to help you through things. When you find someone as wonderful as she is, it really means a lot. And I believe that you can, everything that you're given you can handle. You can, and that's where I start out from. And whatever load is put on your plate, you can handle it and you can get it done. How good it gets done though is another question, and with Talitha there, she's just so wonderful. She balances me out. She in everywhere that I'm deficient, she's really, really strong, and I just enjoy every moment with her. So anything that was going to if staying on meant injuring that wonderful relationship that we have, then I'm out. I'm exiting stage left.
You must be lucky that you've found that sort of relationship a second time.
Yeah, really appreciate it. I really do. Because particularly her support. We're a blended family. She has to live on the coast, and for any people that understand blended families, that there's always, you can't move where you want to move sometimes. You've got to think about the children. You've got to think about their parents as well. It's not always about you. So for us, we don't see each other as much as we'd like to, or probably that often really in the grand scheme of things. But yeah, actually, it's blooming ordinary in terms of how much we get to see each other. But, she's just a wonderful human being. Like, I just, talk about land on your feet. And it's the thin threads. It was a paint rep who was selling me paint at my business, who was her neighbour, and that was the connection. And, I started bought the business, the sandblasting and spray painting business, because I had a dodgy knee and I couldn't go back mining at the time. And I knew I needed to feed the kids, so that was an option. And if I hadn't have done that, which I don't enjoy the process that much, but you just get in and do it. I wouldn't have met her. So for me, to go down that road and do something that is that I did it so I could feed the kids, and it wasn't a passionate career. Well, if that's the reward, well, I did all right.
Well, I think we've chosen very well in our leader of the Cooloola area, and I wish you all the best for the term that you've got in front of you, because obviously there are some challenges. But thank you so much, and it's been an absolute pleasure to spend some time over the bonnet.
Thank you for the invitation, Mark, and I think you're absolutely right. The people have chosen wisely in council. We have a really good group of councillors that diverse backgrounds. We're all different, and we all bring different skills, but we're all committed to making the place better for everyone, and acting responsibly at the same time. So, looking forward to the next 4 years, and hopefully we can start going down the right path, and deliver the things that the ratepayers want, and make the region a better place for everyone. We already know it's good. I mean, we live here because we could live anywhere in the country, but there's nothing better.
I agree.
It is just, and I'm look, I get humbled that the ratepayer, entrusts me with this responsibility. Sometimes I wonder whether they've made the right choice, but I just try every day to do the best I can. I'm very, very grateful that they see some value in me, and I hope I live up to their standards.
It's been a great chat, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you for the opportunity, Mark.